we've got 4 panellists this afternoon. We've got Alice Ark right here. We've got Bridget, who's going to be coming in virtually. We've got Kat, who some of you have met already, and she's well known to us. And we've got Jade. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Alice first. And while Alice is going up to the podium, I'm just going to give you a little bit of blurb about Alice. Alice Arkwright is the Policy and Campaign Support Officer in the TUC's Equality team. She leads our work on flexible working with the TUC Equality Audit. She's an ardent blogger, nice one, and has written on such topics as workers with long COVID, flexible working legislation, and improving mental health and well-being in the workplace, amongst other things. And I would say that each of our panel members have 5 minutes to give you their presentation, so that gives us time for questions at the end. Thank you, Alice.
Thanks very much, everyone, and thanks so much for having me. I was saying earlier, I work for the TUC, but all of my family are teachers, so I always feel at home at the education conferences. I was going to just give a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the work the TUC is doing at the moment, focusing on our Disability Pay Gap Day and some of the work we've done around long COVID, which has become a key priority for us at the TUC. So I think it's been mentioned a lot. There was a question earlier about the disability pay gap, which was on 7th of November, so very recently. And the pay gap is the difference between the average pay of disabled workers compared to non-disabled workers. And our data for this year showed that that pay gap has gone up, so it's now 17.2%. So in kind of what that means in reality is that disabled workers on average earn £2.05 less per hour than non-disabled workers. And that equates to £3,700 per year, which is a really significant amount of money. And just to flag, it's even higher for disabled women. So disabled women face a pay gap of 35% compared to non-disabled men, which is a huge amount of money in terms of the pay that you're taking home. Within your sector, so in education, the pay gap is 15%, and that's a difference of about £2 per hour. In terms of what the TUC are campaigning around, Kudzia touched on some of this earlier, but we're calling for the government to close the disability pay gap, and we want the government to enact a statutory requirement on employers to report their pay gaps and then produce action plans as to how they're going to tackle it. We also want employers to introduce comprehensive workforce monitoring and action plans, so there is no reason employers need to wait for the government to legislate on this. They can be doing that now, and that's a key thing that you can be raising with your employers. To go into some of the reasons behind the pay gap as well, so we know that disabled workers are overrepresented in lower paid occupations and industries, so we're also calling for a £15 an hour minimum wage as soon as possible, because if we lift the pay of low paid workers, we will lift the pay of disabled workers. The pay gap is also linked to an overrepresentation in part-time work, and sometimes that is due to because of a lack of reasonable adjustments offered in full-time work. Disabled workers are also overrepresented in insecure work, so I'm sure many of you know people who have moved into supply or agency work, and it's linked to discrimination, as we know, and a failure to provide reasonable adjustments. Our research that we did during the pandemic showed the massive challenges that disabled people face in accessing reasonable adjustments, which many of you will have personal experience of or have supported others in your workplaces. So almost half of those who requested reasonable adjustments failed to get some of all of what they needed to work effectively, and around 30% of people didn't ask to start with because of the fear of negative treatment. Those who do ask are often left waiting months or even years for a response from their employer, and often not given a reason as to why their reasonable adjustments aren't provided, which makes it very difficult to then challenge that decision when your employer's made it. In terms of the law, we want the government to strengthen legislation around reasonable adjustment requests. So substantial penalties for non-compliance. We want to make reasonable adjustment passports mandatory in all public bodies. So they are essentially documents that you can complete with your employer to list your reasonable adjustments. It then means if you have a new line manager come in, a new head of department, a new head, you don't have to then renegotiate all those reasonable adjustments. They are written down, they are agreed, and you can continue with them. In a public body, it would also mean that if you moved from workplace to workplace, those reasonable adjustments could stand. We also need the EHRC to better regulate employers who don't offer reasonable adjustments. So we want the code of practice to be strengthened and for ring-fenced resourcing for the EHRC to make sure they're properly carrying out their duties. I wanted to cover in a bit of detail the work we've done on long COVID because it's a really important new area of work and is affecting, the latest data says now, 2.3 million people in the UK. So that's, as we're in Birmingham, it is bigger than the populations of Birmingham and Manchester combined. I think NASUWT produced some data as well that showed that 4% of the education workforce have had symptoms or have symptoms of long COVID. So it's a really big issue in the sector, and we know that teachers are experiencing. We ran a survey of over 3,000 people with long COVID, and they told us about the impact it was having on their lives and on their work. Over half of respondents told us they'd experienced discrimination or disadvantage, and 1 in 20 told us they'd been forced out of their jobs following having long COVID. A key issue we're seeing at the moment is people with long COVID are not getting the support they need from their employers, and best practice is employers should be looking for the reasonable adjustments they can provide to people with long COVID so that they can stay in their jobs if they want to and be able to work. We also know that we are now kind of almost 3 years on from the beginning of the pandemic, so many people with long COVID meet that legal definition of disabled under the Equality Act. So there are employers breaking the law through not providing these reasonable adjustments. And we need to make sure that employers understand their duties and are held to account. In terms of what that means in workplaces, I was just going to quickly run through some practical things that kind of people with long COVID tell us helps in terms of support, but also what we want the government to do to kind of tackle this emerging crisis. In terms of if you have long COVID in a workplace, I think very similar things that we've talked about earlier apply. It's really important to let your employer know the symptoms you're experiencing and to keep a record of your experiences, so keep a diary, for example. As a rep, it's many of the duties you would carry out anyway. It becomes really important to attend meetings with the person and take notes, often because of the fatigue-based symptoms that people with long COVID experience and the cognitive retention symptoms they may be experiencing. In terms of reasonable adjustments, kind of within a school setting, some key things we've heard from teachers with long COVID and others with long COVID is adjustment to duties. So are there certain duties that can be done from home, for example, planning, marking? Obviously, you'll need to be in a classroom for some duties, but there may be some things you can do at home. Increased breaks and rest spaces. A phased return to work is really important for people with long COVID, but we find that standard phased return to work don't really work. People tend to need longer, and they tend to need to come back with less duties than before, so they don't come back into a job where they're then overworked and have to go off sick again. Disability leave is a really key one, so people shouldn't be pushed down sickness absence procedures. They should be given paid time off to attend medical appointments, receive treatment, and that sickness they take in relation to their long COVID shouldn't then trigger a capability procedure or kind of other triggers that it may lead to. I would just say all of those reasonable adjustments as well are adjustments that can work for many other disabled people and for many other impairments. So if you're looking at policies in your workplace, there are multiple changes that can occur that would benefit people with long COVID, but other people as well. In terms of what we're calling for the government to do, we want to make sure that everyone with long COVID is formally protected under the Equality Act. So we want long COVID to be a named disability in that act, to make sure that everyone is getting protections, and NAS have campaigned with us around that. We're also calling for COVID to be recognised as an occupational disease. So that means that anyone who had a COVID infection at work and then had to leave work would be able to claim financial support and benefits, which is obviously key for anyone who can't work at the moment. Just to say, we've just closed another long COVID survey, so we'll be releasing new evidence really shortly. And around 30% of those respondents were in the education sector, so we'll have lots of new data kind of specifically around what's happening in education. I'll stop there because I'm conscious I've probably already spoken for 5 minutes, but very happy to take any questions on it. And just wanted to say thank you very much for having me, and best of luck in your ballot. I won't repeat what Patrick said excellently earlier, but do vote yes, talk to your colleagues about voting yes, and I hope to be able to come to one of your picket lines very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. We'll wait until the end, and then you can ask questions of any of the panelists, if that's okay, everybody. So now I'm going to bring in Bridget. Bridget is coming in virtually. Welcome, Bridget. Oh, I don't know if you'll go up there. I can say welcome, Bridget, that way. Bridget is, those of you who don't know, Bridget Phillipson is the Shadow Secretary of State for Education. I'm sure many of us here, well, all of us here wish she was the Secretary of State for Education. But Bridget is the Labour MP for Houghton and Sunderland South, one of 3 constituencies in the city of Sunderland. She was first elected to the seat in May 2010 and was re-elected in 2015, 2017 and the 2019 general election. So obviously everybody there thinks you're doing a great job because they keep re-electing you, Bridget. She has served with Keir Starmer's shadow cabinet as Shadow Secretary of State for Education since November 2021. So very welcome, Bridget, and the conference floor is yours.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, and thanks for the introduction. I'm sorry not to be with you in person. I'm here in sunny Sunderland today, but I'm delighted to be able to join you virtually. I spoke to my local NASUWT branch recently, and I do speak regularly to Patrick, who does an amazing job as your General Secretary, but I really welcome the opportunity to speak to members as well here today. And I just want to start by saying a massive thank you. That's not just a thank you for the work that you all do day in, day out, but in particular for the work that you've done since the pandemic began. Because I'm aware that, you know, our young people and children went through extraordinary and terrible times, and you did so much to support them both at school and at home, looking at the children who really needed that extra support, but especially when confronted with a government that wasn't doing what they ought to have been doing around that support that was needed. Our children really did deserve better from the government, but you all stepped in, and I want to say a massive thank you, and I don't think it can be said enough. Today, of course, the government likes to give the impression that it's all over, and I'll give some general remarks about where we are at the moment and Labour's approach, and then obviously happy to, you know, looking forward to the wider discussion too. It feels to me like time and again our children and education is just treated like an afterthought for this government, and a Labour government wouldn't be on to its 5th Education Secretary in a year, you can be absolutely sure of that. If I'd been Education Secretary on the day that schools closed to most pupils, I would have started work on that day on 3 plans. So an urgent plan to support learning while children, most children, were unavoidably at home, plan to reopen schools so as safely as possible for staff and students alike, but also, most importantly, a plan to make sure that no child was left behind following that disruption that we saw from the pandemic, and the government has consistently failed on all of that. As you'll all know, Sir Kevin Collins' plan was rejected out of hand by the Chancellor and our Prime Minister, who told us that he'd maxed out on support for our children. An amount of money that their own advisor told them wasn't enough was spent in a way that was almost calculated to result in the least successful outcomes. And it takes real effort to spend as little money as they did on our children and still end up wasting so much of it. Rather than trusting schools and teachers to deliver that, they gave it over to a HR firm with no teaching or tutoring experience, not paying the market rate, and with lessons and work being delivered to empty classrooms. So as I say, time and again, from this government, our children have been an afterthought. And we know that the Prime Minister cares about some children's education. He's been a major donor to his old school, Winchester College. but I care about all of our children's education and the opportunities that education should open up for everyone in our country. And when I follow some of the speeches that we see, whether it's in Downing Street or in the Commons from the government, I'm looking at whether they mention children, whether they mention education. The most recent set piece we had from the new Prime Minister in Downing Street, he mentioned children once, but only in the context of debt. Young people, nothing at all. And he didn't say a word about education. And I think that is a much bigger failing that we've seen, not just during the pandemic, but actually going way back to May 2010. And I think it's a failure to understand that we need to put education right at the heart of a fairer and better Britain for all of us, as part of that change that we need to see. More recently, of course, we've had the Education White Paper, which became the Schools Bill, now abandoned, but a real, I think, admission of intellectual bankruptcy, that after 12 years, the big ideas were 3/4 of schools carrying on as normal, teaching the hours that they already do, and that when children are falling behind, schools should be there to help, as you all already are. And of course, the National Tutoring Programme, described by providers as at risk of catastrophic failure, that somehow that will be the answer to all of our problems. And I'm determined that under Labour things will be different, and I want to work with you all as part of that partnership in forging a different kind of approach. And I want us to think of education as being from the early years, from when our children are young, right throughout school, through college or university, but right throughout life too, so that we're shaping the individuals of the future and the society of the future too. And I'm clear that we're setting out a plan for how we're going to deliver that. So we'll start by ending the tax breaks that private schools enjoy, and we'll invest that money in all of our young people, in all of their futures, with careers advisors in every secondary school and college, making sure that young people are aware of all of the options that are available to them, alongside 2 weeks' worth of compulsory work experience. And we'll make sure that our children get the digital skills that they need to, and deliver a national excellence programme to recruit and train over 6,500 new teachers, but also support for new head teachers in particular in those first years on the job, but a wider teacher development programme too, to enable all leaders and teachers to access really high quality continuing professional development. Because if we're to invest in our children, if we're to deliver the best future for them, then that means investing in all of you, because we can't do it without you. And I mean all of you, because as you'll know far better than me, a country with a disability pay gap of nearly 14% is a country that's failing too many of its citizens. Alongside that, we'll also reform Ofsted's role to enhance its focus on schools and colleges that are finding it tougher, that are struggling, and around enabling and directing support, not just on this high-stakes system that we've got at the moment that helps no one. And we'll bring a new focus too where it comes to children's mental health, with mental health counsellors in our schools and colleges, because you will have all seen the impact around mental health where it comes to our children. But I know that for many of you, it's been a really tough and challenging time as well. But of course, that attainment gap that we see, the gap that's widening all the time, opens up early between children from different backgrounds, between children from families with money and those who have less, between children from families with time and those who don't have time. And I'm clear that every child in every school and every family deserves the best possible start. And that has to be around delivering a modern childcare system too, one that supports parents from the end of parental leave right through to the end of primary school, and that gives children a really great start to the day and parents the chance to work as well. That's why I was delighted to set out how Labour would make sure that we have fully funded breakfast clubs for every child in every primary school in England. And many of you will see the difference that can make when you have children arriving at school, ready to learn, ready to start the day, the impact around behaviour and attendance, because of course it's about the club as well as the breakfast and the wider support I believe that we need to see for parents right now during this really tough and challenging time. And I know that many of you will be stepping in to provide that Hilton support to our parents and to our families, but it shouldn't always fall to teachers and our brilliant support staff too to deliver that support that really ought to be there much more widely within our society. Now, I know that vision, it feels like a long way away, and we face so many challenges at the moment. You know, the sight of teachers and support staff using food banks is just appalling and extraordinary. The fact that food banks exist at all in our society is a real indictment of failure, and Whenever I visit schools, as I do all the time, I was yesterday visited 4 schools in my constituency. The sight of food banks at the, food donation boxes at the entrances to schools, uniform exchanges, hygiene packs. I mean, it is testament to how much you all want to help, but it really is a shocking indictment of the failure that we see within our wider society too, because every working person deserves a decent standard of pay on which they can not only support themselves, but support their families and have real choices about what's right for them, not having to depend on the kindness of others. And I know that you've seen pay packets which have been falling in real terms over these last 12 years. And, when Labour comes to government, and I'm never complacent, but I'm more confident than I've been for some time that we're getting closer and closer to that point, we'll have a huge set of challenges, which I'm sure you will all appreciate after these last 12 years of total underinvestment in our vital public services. Public services that are relying so much on your goodwill and on the ability of staff to do more and more all the time. Infrastructure that's quite literally broken and breaking, and a workforce from our support staff, our teachers, our heads and lecturers alike, train drivers, firefighters, everyone working across our public services, worn out and finding life really tough. And we'll inherit all of that when we enter government. So I know how tough things are right now, and I'm under no illusions about the urgency and need to change and improve your working conditions and make sure you're getting the support that you deserve. But I've got to be honest that these will not all be areas which we can immediately fix. It's going to take us some time to get all of this right, and I want to work with you to make that a reality as part of the next Labour government. Just very finally to conclude, just the other week I launched, alongside David Blunkett, his report to the Labour Party around the Skills Commission, around the future shape of skills, particularly where it comes to adult education and further education. And David, as many of you will be aware, grew up blind, won a place at university, built a political career, first locally and then nationally, out of that incredible determination and hard work, but a really deep-rooted belief in Labour values. And he became Education Secretary when I was at school just over 25 years ago. And the story that I want to tell is the difference that we can make from government when we work together. The massive impact that Labour had where it came to education, maintenance allowance, investment in our teachers and our support staff, that ambitious programme around making sure that all children get the best start in life, and a growing economy where we see rising wages and better support for that. And of course our trade unions playing a really vital role as part of that. So when I look around now and see many of the people that benefited from the impact of a Labour government, it makes me more determined than ever that we transform education in our country and see a better and fairer society. That is the change we need to see. That's the reality that we will see under a Labour government, and I look forward to working with you to making sure that we support all of our brilliant teachers in seeing that happen, because we can't do it without you. And thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Bridget. And as you can tell from my accent, I'm from a nation that has got a Labour government, and I can say I wish that for every single person. Absolutely, we do. So our next speaker is Kat Downs. We met her earlier. Kat Downs has been a teacher since 2005. As I did say, nearly been teaching 20 years. Teaching 20 years. Much of that time has been she's been teaching SEND, both within mainstream and special educational settings. As an activist, we know she's passionate about equality. She speaks around the country on issues around neurodiversity, ableism and disability. And she's spoken at many of our conferences, thankfully. Kat has led projects within school and campaigns around LGBTQIA, and regularly speaks to bring motions to TUC and, as I've said, NASUWT conferences. So Kat has also served on our NASUWT Disability Teachers Advisory Committee since 2016. So, Kat, the floor is yours. If you feel more comfortable sitting, you can. You don't have to stand at the podium.
So I'm going to sit down, which I'm sure will be acceptable to everybody. One of the things I want to speak about in terms of securing a better deal for teachers, specifically disabled and neurodivergent teachers, is for us it didn't stop at the ballot. So since 2010, Obviously, we've experienced such a lot of cuts and such a lot of cuts to public services, which directly impact us more often than it does a non-disabled or a neurotypical person. So, for example, buses. We are probably more likely to rely on cars or buses than we don't have the option, and to quite a few of us to use bikes and to walk to work. And some of the policies that are coming out are absolutely needed for climate change and everything like that, but it's resulting in things like disabled bays, blue badge bays being cut from city centres. So, for example, York City Centre, if you have a blue badge, you can't access the city centre anymore. And buses and trains are just an absolute nightmare for many disabled people and neurodivergent people to access. So when we're talking about a better deal for disabled teachers, that is wider than the school. It starts when we leave our house and doesn't end until we get back to our house. It includes improving public transport. It includes improving access to vehicles and electric vehicles for disabled people. A very small proportion of disabled and neurodivergent people now can get access to Motability because of the way PIP has been applied. And if you're talking the petrol costs, diesel costs are just absolutely horrific. And if we don't have those access to those vehicles, we can't get to work. We can't get to the places that we want to in society. So the rising cost of those vehicles, the cost of running those vehicles, we don't really have access to the alternatives like hybrid and electric because it is so expensive. It costs, on average, a disabled person £580 extra per month. Yet we have a rhetoric from our government that's prevalent in society that we don't deserve PIP and that we don't deserve ESA, we don't deserve Independent Loan Fund, we don't deserve Disabled Students Allowance, and we don't deserve that support that we can access society in the same way as everybody else. So it is so much wider, and we really need our government and our opposition politicians and our Patrick to be taking those issues forward for us, because they affect us as soon as we leave home. And it's not just the barriers within the school building that we're struggling with, it's the barriers as soon as we leave our houses. Things like diagnostic rates for an access to diagnosis for neurodivergent conditions, the waiting list for those for adults are so long that before somebody's even reached that diagnostic point, they may have lost their job, they may have developed other mental health conditions because of the treatment they've received in employment, and they may actually be so traumatised by that they don't go back to employment, which is a massive failure and could be so better tackled if we had self-referral to some of these assessments. For example, in Leeds, you can self-refer to the autism service, which is absolutely brilliant, because getting through GPs to get a diagnosis of a neurodivergent condition is an absolute nightmare. A lot of them don't even, I've heard repeatedly, and it's been said to me at least twice today, that people were told to go away, do an online test, they're not empirically based, and come back and show the results for the GP. Absolutely should not be like that. I've been on the waiting list for the mental health support that I need for absolute ages, and I'm still waiting, and I'm literally hanging on by the skin of my teeth in my job. I'm really lucky I've got a very good employer, but all of these things are barriers that we have to face. I don't know about anyone else in here, but if you're if you're lucky enough as a disabled person to be working full-time, if you want to access appointments at the hospital, if you want to access appointments at the GP, there are lots of GPs you can only get an appointment at if you ring at 8 o'clock in the morning. Well, do I choose to work or do I choose to get an appointment? And you're going to choose your employment over their access to their health. I'm sure a lot of people are nodding in here that they spend a lot of their holidays going to the GP and going to appointments, and that's their holiday gone. So better access to healthcare for disabled people and neurodivergent people is a massive thing that we really, really need, as well as our students, because our students are massively struggling. And restoration of all the support that we had in place, such as full restoration of disabled students allowance. A lot of disabled students now have to buy their laptop because it's considered that everybody should have access to a laptop anyway at university, whereas previously disabled students would have had support with that. And one laptop is not the same as another laptop. People still need adaptations that are expensive to laptops and still need that software, and that is sometimes problematic where people are being asked to fund, that students are being asked to fund that themselves. So that is creating a massive barrier for people even getting to university to even qualify as teachers. And we really need our politicians to take some of these things on board, because the wonderful government that we have in now, and that is a little bit of sarcasm, have done nothing to support or really explain to the public or society why disabled people need support like PIP. Why disabled people need support by independent living. All they've done is demonise us. And what we need is a massive cultural and societal shift where infrastructure is no longer a reasonable adjustment, it is an adjustment that takes place. They need to put some teeth into that legislation around reasonable adjustment. We need teeth around building regulations that say at one disabled toilet where you've got a toilet against the wall is accessible to everybody. It's not. And it's those kind of things that we need to see infrastructural change at the top level to make working conditions for disabled people and disabled teachers improve dramatically. But that has to come with the coming from the top, a change around the rhetoric around disabled people, moving away from this idea that we are sort of some of the things like I've explained today, the ableist attitudes that disabled people are putting it on, or they're undeserving of that PIP money or that independent living fund. That money is to help us live as part of society. And as a society that is supposed to be moving forward into 2022, as was said this morning, I just feel like we've gone backwards massively with a lot of disabled and neurodivergent rights. So I think that's probably all I want to say on that matter, so hopefully that covers, but I really hope that we can think about better deal for teachers, just not just as part of our ballot, which is vitally important, but outside of the ballot as well.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you, Kat. Absolutely agree 100%. So our final panelist member is Jade. Jade Weir-Reid. Welcome, Jade. Jade is a qualified secondary design and technology teacher. She's spoken out about her experiences of being a black British woman diagnosed with dyslexia at a late stage in life. Jade is founder of Carib & Co Brunch, which is a non-profit community interest company which runs a range of event-based services such as poetry and comedy evenings, art exhibitions, fashion shows, music gigs and entrepreneurship. Fabulous. During lockdown, they successfully ran a series of social media events primarily for young black, Asian and multi-ethnic communities in West London, and Jade was part of the Portrait of Black Britain, which explores what does it mean to be black and living in the UK. Jade, the floor is yours. If you want to sit here, you can, but if you want to go up to the podium, you can do that as well. Up to you.
Oh my God, thank you. Hello, colleagues, and welcome. Sorry, excuse if my voice is a little bit funny. This is the end period of my flu, so apologies if it does go a little bit croaky. But welcome. Thank you for your introduction, I appreciate it. I do quite a lot outside of teaching. Obviously, I started as a full-time teacher, being dyslexic and diagnosed at a later stage at university. And I was in it for about 3 to 4 years until I made the decision to go down the supply route, purely because I felt that the treatment, in terms, I'm just going to talk about my experiences if that's okay, and then just briefly. But I just felt because I was in a school, loved it, was absolutely amazing. They understood who I was. I explained that I was also dyslexic. But I found that there was a pressure at a certain point, not just on me, but on everyone, with no notice to say that we have to do work in our holidays, which I'd planned a holiday to go back to Jamaica. And I just knew I wouldn't be able to fit that in. So I said to my head of department at the time that, you know, I'll do my best, but really I do need notice to be able to try and fit this in, because I might not be able to sort of deliver that. It wasn't, it was frowned upon, it wasn't liked, because generally I am someone that just does it and gets on with it, and generally left alone and marking and everything like that. I came back in September, and unfortunately I did leave that particular school purely because I just felt I was just under too much pressures in terms of stress, and I'm sure my colleagues here, you probably might have gone through that route, where I just felt like I couldn't do it, I couldn't put up with it. And there was just no accessibility in terms of access to work. I was going down that route, but found myself leaving before accessing access to work, shall I say. So I just think my experiences in terms of going down the supply was the best for me. I felt as though I can still teach, but also be able to manage my capabilities, as well as being able to deliver, to my amazing students. So I might go down that permanent route one day. I don't know what that looks like, but I just feel that the pressures that we face in terms of teachers is just not acceptable. The pay we talked about is just not acceptable. I was off sick last week for at least 2 weeks. At least 1 week where I was like sort of bedbound, almost similar to COVID. I also had COVID a year and a half ago. And it just brought back those experiences. Unfortunately, I did not get pay, as you know, being a supply route or supply teaching route, I didn't get pay. There was also no circuit, like, you know, no sort of acknowledgement, are you okay? Like, you know, hopefully you're feeling better, but it was more just getting back into work. I felt bad not being in, but I had to make the important decision to be able to fully recover and then be best to teach. And that was, you know, day 4. So I just feel as though just those pressures of not being able to have that income that I might have needed, you know, did put me back a little bit in this time. So it's just, yeah, there's a lot that I think we need to look at in terms of whether, you know, judging what route, is that the best route that would have been great for me if I was on a long-term sickness. If it was, you know, 1 month, I probably wouldn't have been paid to be able to pay my bills or do the things that I want to do. Outside of teaching, I do run a non-profit organisation, which is Caribbean Co Community Interest Company, where I work with different communities, but also people who are just like me, so disabilities, dyslexia, and we talk about what that looks like in the community. So we've ran a lot of COVID sessions in which there was people that I've worked with and I've found out that they've also had long COVID and the stresses that it has when someone has a disability, and that their pay living allowance apparently was not going up in inflation. So unfortunately, there's people that I know in the community that we work with that can't work because they're unable to do the job mentally, physically, because they have a disability. And the pay that they get, that's going to be the pay that they're going to have for the rest of their life. They can't, and they have family members, in which is a teacher that I know, that supports her brother to be able to just get by in life, but he cannot work for the rest of his life. So it's things like that that we're facing, and other disability members that are facing in the community that, that cannot, you know, ever work again, and they're living on the allowances that the government are given, but unfortunately they're not enough to pay the bills. There's still someone else that's helping out their son or their disability son or their disability brother to be able to do the things that they love and enjoy. And that makes me frustrated. So we are trying, in my organisation, to try and work with communities to see what we can do to help. If there's way that we can, you know, work with different people within the community to volunteer for our organisation, and hopefully if we receive any, you know, funding, we're able to help them out in that way. Obviously it's not, you know, the best, it might not help their situation, but we try and work with people to try and, you know, hear their stories and their messages. I think that's what I'm going to say, but I'm hoping there'll be questions afterwards as well, maybe.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jade. Yeah, we have got some time for some questions. So if you want to ask a question directly to either of our panel members, please do indicate that when you speak, and also please your name so that they can answer you personally. If it's a general question, that'll be fine, because I'll give everybody time to answer it. I have got one comment that's come in, and I'm going to take the prerogative of the chair for that first, whilst you decide whether you want to ask a question or not. And that's that there are, and this is a general question to everybody really, I suppose, there are several occupational and notifiable diseases, and this has obviously come from a member in Scotland, because they says, in Scotland we are looking for long COVID to have the same status as tuberculosis. So could that be a route that, another route that it goes down to sort of, to make sure that long COVID is recognised as a notifiable disease? So I don't know if somebody wants to answer that while we're going along. Anybody want to come in? Do you want to come in on that, Bridget? Putting you on the spot?
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, I'm obviously seriously concerned about the impact of long COVID that we're seeing, and I don't think the government is taking it seriously enough in looking at the impact on the workforce. I think on that very specific issue, that does does slightly stray beyond my area of responsibility, so I won't talk too much in detail around that. But I think when you look at both the impact of, both long COVID, but also the number of people that we see currently out of the workforce who would like the opportunity to be working, in part because of the very long NHS waits that we see, as Kat was talking about, the waits that we see for mental health support and wider diagnosis and treatment. I think that there are lots of areas where people are being prevented from taking part in the workforce because of that wider failing that we're seeing in our public services.
Thank you, Bridget. Alice, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I can come in on that one. I think, first of all, it's really important to stress that point about the absolute lack, basically non-existent support that the government has offered to people with long COVID. And these are people who probably caught COVID whilst going to work and keeping our country running, and now they are kind of left in an awful situation where many people can't work, are being forced out of their jobs, and the government are doing nothing. In terms of the question, I'm not aware of the specific kind of legislation around it in Scotland or what's happening in Scotland, but it sounds similar to what our health and safety officer has been working on, which is about getting COVID recognised as an occupational disease. So that would mean that, as it works at the moment, a government minister has to prescribe which diseases or conditions are occupational diseases, and then that means you can claim things like industry benefits. The government makes the decision, but they take evidence from the Industrial Advisory Council. I know that that's not the right name, but it's something like that. It's like the IAC. They produced a report in 2021, I believe, that said one of the measures they use to kind of provide evidence on this is whether there's a kind of twofold risk of you catching COVID in your workplace compared to the general population. And they've seen that this is true in multiple industries now. And that report came out over a year ago now, but yet we still haven't seen any action from the government on this. So I think that's probably connected, but sorry, I don't know the specifics in Scotland.
No, but that's very helpful. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to move to questions, and I see, Joe, you have a question? Is it directed to one person, or is it...
Probably to Bridget,
okay.
But I'd welcome any. So I'm Jo Jekyll, I'm Bromley. I was listening to what you were saying about mental health. I mean, obviously, if a Labour government were to get in, you're basically stuck with pulling everything, all the public services, including education and mental health, out of a deep, deep bog of quicksand, which has pulled everything down. So that's going to be difficult. But there seems to be, I don't know whether you would be able to actually think about doing anything about the postcode lottery. So, for example, ADHD, where I live in southeast London, my very late diagnosis, about 4.5 years ago, was not treated properly in Bromley. So then I had another year or two to wait to go to SLAM, to the Maudsley, and about 2 years, 30 months ago, I was told it would be 30 months, and I said, well, I am old, I'm more likely to pop my clogs before I get anything done properly. And yes, Thursday I was told, well, it's still 30 months. So that's a non-thing, but I know that Bromley's really bad, North London is better, so there's that. And when it comes to syllabuses, it's not in education. As a supply teacher and tutor, I've noticed that science and biology syllabuses are rubbish. They are, the syllabuses and the way, the exams at primary level and the way that the education goes, it is not geared up to getting people who are competent, flexible, also able to discuss things that they don't really like hearing. There's a whole range of things, and I realise it would be a very tall order to do anything, but it would be nice to know that there is some, because right the way through education, through a lot of things that I'm hearing here, the people at the chalk face, the people with the experience and the expertise are not listened to. So.
No. Thank you, Joe. She did direct it at you, Bridget. So over to you.
Yeah, great, thanks. Thank you very much, Joan. I'm very sorry to hear about your experiences and the length of time that you're waiting to get the support that you need. There is the real issue around postcode lottery that applies both to children and to adults, and it applies, as you'll know as well, where it comes to send support for children and young people too. I mean, we need to make sure that there are national standards across our country, and that's why Labour has a commitment around access to mental health support, but also genuine parity of esteem, so that we see recognition and support around mental health too. Of course, we also at the same time face really big challenges where it comes to the growing waiting lists in our NHS for treatment around physical health conditions as well. So there's, as you say, there's an awful lot that we will need to fix from government. Where it comes to curriculum more widely, I'm clear that we do need to see curriculum review, and I want to work with the profession around all of that. I want to work with you all in making change in our system. I'm also conscious that given the real turbulence that you've been through, particularly in the last couple of years, although more broadly, of course, too, there's a balance to strike in making sure that any changes that we make are achievable, that we can do that in a considered way that works with you to make that possible. The last thing I would want to do is to add more on top of an already kind of growing list of concerns the teachers and support staff are facing right now. But I think politicians overall in recent years have been far too involved in some of the micro detail of all of this, and I would want to see a bigger focus on that wider change that we need to see right across our education system that allows our children and young people to thrive and to achieve, but also that makes sure that all of you working in education get the support that you deserve, because as I say, we can't make that change that our children and young people need unless we make sure that we're supporting our brilliant workforce as well.
Thank you, Bridget. Kat, do you want to come in here?
Yeah, just because you spoke about Labour policy and neurodivergent conditions, there is a group called Neurodivergent Labour who are working quite closely with certain people in the shadow cabinet. They've been having conversation with Annalise Dodds. John McDonald has been a big supporter for a number of years, and they have a manifesto around neurodiversity. And one of those things is about making sure that it's inbuilt into Labour policy around the diagnostic ways and improving diagnostic rates, not just for people in the community, but also for the number of people that end up in the prison system with neurodivergent conditions. And we will all be teaching some of those, sadly, some of those students that have not received the support, because I'm also aware there's a massive increase in the number of students that are getting to year 7 and 8 and 9 without an ECHP for neurodivergent conditions, partly because of COVID, but partly because it's just not the time, the money and the experience to me people be doing that in primary settings. So there's a lot in that manifesto which is, I know, is being worked into Labour Party policy. So I'm just adding that on with my other hat on.
No, thank you for that. Thank you for that. That's what we like. We like everybody to bring everything to the table so we know we got as much information as we can. Thank you very much. So we've got another question at the back there. Yep.
Yeah, my name is Benedetta, and this is a question for Bridget and also my colleague there. One, I would like to know what reasonable adjustment you can, a supply teacher can get, because you go to various, schools, and what access to work can be done, because I think it's a difficult thing, because I'm like a person on 0-hour contract, and I don't know where I'll be going next when I wake up. Number two, this is something most people don't want to talk about, and it's about refugees or asylum seekers. Nobody wants to talk about such things, or immigration. But I want to talk about it because as a teacher, whenever I go to school, and I'm also an active person in the community and I see it with my eyes, how do I wake up and see somebody being threatened that the following day they might go to Rwanda, this Rwanda thing, everything is Rwanda, Rwanda, Rwanda now. But then on the other side, oh, come, I've got a bedroom. You can come to my bedroom, I've got 3 other bedroom. And our students are seeing these things in schools where we are raising funds for Ukrainian families. And there's a Somali family here, there's one from Kashmir, there's one from Afghanistan who is going there hungry. How can the government, whether it's going to be Labour or Conservative, look into their eyes and have a hierarchy of refugees. And that is what we've started having in this country. To me, an asylum seeker, when they run, yes, they need to be assessed, to be assessed and be invited here if they're eligible to be done that way. But how can a family be running from Peterborough to Birmingham? Today they are in a travel lodge here because of housing, or they've been taken there, and their children who are supposed to be school are also running around with them. So, and some of these children also have got disability. They don't have that fairness to be assessed like other students, or to be given any support in school, but then they're deemed to have behavioral problems. How can we solve this? How can a Labour government, if they're going to come to power, have humane policies so that everybody is treated the same, so that we don't have this hierarchy? I know war anywhere in the world is bad. I know war kills and people die, but the way they die in Kashmir, the way they die in Afghanistan, is the way they'll die in Ukraine. So we should not have this division, because it's bringing actually lots of tension within communities. And as a teacher, how will I feel? You're talking of mental health. It affects me too. I'm sorry to bring that on too here.
No, thank you for that. And I can tell by here, everyone wants to come in and answer that. Everybody wants to have and there were two parts to that. There was also the part about access arrangements, that's my exam formate hat on there, but you know what I mean, employment access for supply teachers. So Bernadette, I'm going to start with you, but everybody here, I think, wants to chip in here. So Bernadette, I'll start with you. No, not Bernadette. Bernadette was there. Bridget. So, look, you know, it's been a long day for me. Bernadette.
No problem. No, thank you very much. I mean, on issues around supply teachers more broadly, it's a conversation I've been having with Patrick a lot around that's a part of it, but the wider concerns that are there where it comes to change that's needed in lots of areas affecting supply teachers. So that's something that we are working on, and Patrick's always a big champion on all of this more broadly. I think in terms of the second question, before I became a Member of Parliament, I used to manage a women's refuge for women and children fleeing domestic violence, and that included working with many refugee women as well. So I'm very mindful of the point that you raised, and I saw it firsthand. The impact, the distress and what so many of those women and children had been through. And I think there is a real desire amongst so many people to seek to help those who are fleeing persecution. Of course, what we have at the moment is a system that overall is just broken, where people wait so long to ever have their case even considered. So we're clear that we need to make sure that people are treated with compassion, with respect, and that their cases are promptly processed, because it's not fair that people wait for such a very long time in order to have a decision and for their case to be properly dealt with. And the government's Rwanda policy is completely wrong and unethical, and we would end that.
Thank you, Bridget. Who else wanted to come in here first? You want to come in, Jade? You haven't spoken.
I was going to speak about my the supply teaching. I think it depends on what sector you're in. Like, if it's more a long-term supply, there is support that you can get. Obviously, I know you're on a 0-hour contract, but if it's something that, you're going to be in a particular, teaching position, and depending on the school, the head teacher, I think there are ways that they can support if you're going to be there for the whole year. So I would say, if you're able to maybe see if there is any way of going through that sector, but also just trying to find out from your head teacher, because some of them are really understanding. Where I am at the moment, I've had such a brilliant experience with my head teacher, in which she's able to now offer me like a daily rate between me and the school to be able to teach the subjects that I want to teach within my field. And she's really understanding when it came to just my own personal needs as a teacher, and just was able to help and support. I know if I was at a different school, it might have been very different. In terms of going down the other question that you spoke about, the same school that I was in actually, I was able to bring my things that I do in the community to showcase you know, that to that particular school. So it could be, well, let's talk about, you know, bringing Black History Month to a school, for example, that would never spoke about Black History Month at all. But also we talked about having markets in the school where those students who came from different backgrounds was able to showcase or wear badges, like Palestinian, you know, like badges that kind of work, that showcase their views and their opinions, and they very much liked that. They felt that, Miss, this has never ever been done in a school. And I said, well, we're going to do more of it, and there's going to be more markets, and you know, they wanted to design T-shirts and bring in and showcase that we're standing for this particular right. So I just think, you know, it depends on a school, but I think, you know, if you're able to, you know, speak to the students and see what they want, I think, you know, something can be done.
Thank you. Kat.
Sorry. I think there needs to be much greater pressure, for want of a better word, but probably more legal requirement on supply agencies to actually supply prospective people that are going to work there with the access arrangements for that school. So I know, like, most people assume that, not in here, but outside, that when we're talking about access, have we got ramps, have we got lifts? I've had similar experience to Fiona, who was speaking earlier about you have to have a key to access lifts. I did have one member that I supported who had, she had long COVID. Can't really go into any of the details around it, but she was made to carry a lift key with a block that big around with her, which is so demeaning. And I think it doesn't welcome supply teachers to school regardless. It's not welcoming at all, but there is more to access than those things. You need to know for somebody who has needs around their vision or has needs around their neurodivergent status, you need maps of the school, you need access, you need to know where are the toilets, all of those things before you go into that school. So I think there needs to be much greater pressure put on supply agencies to actually provide that information, because I think there are cases where I think like they're making that decision of whether it's accessible for the teacher or not, and it's not their decision to make, it's your decision to make. Secondly, I absolutely hear you and have absolutely the same concern around refugee children. I have put a motion into conference. I'm hoping that gets chosen the ballot. I can't promote that or any of that, but please account for it, and if it's something you feel that, you know, is you can support, have a read of that. But I think the other things around that is we're finding children are coming to us very traumatised, and staff don't have the training to deal with that. The students often don't have the access to support, because quite often not always have consistent access to the GPs for the same reason we do, but also cultural concerns around accessing that support as well. And there's not tailored support. There needs to be specific tailored support for all refugees around mental health issues, but particularly our children who are coming as refugee children. I can't imagine what some of them have seen. I literally, my heart just, I can't, don't get obsessed about it, but some of the stories that we hear, because we have quite a high migrant level in our school, we don't have the capacity to support that. So we need training to be able to support them, and they need quick access, but it needs to be specific to their needs, and it needs to be tailored to their needs and understanding of their context around the trauma that they deal with and stuff.
Yes, thank you, Kat. It's not just the language support they need, it is the mental health, it's everything. Thank you very much for that. And I'm going to hand over to Alice now.
Thanks very much. I think two really important questions. On the reasonable adjustments for supply teachers, I just wanted to make 2 points. That was, obviously there is a huge issue with agency workers not having the same rights as formal employees, and that's one of the big campaign areas of the TUC to make sure those rights are equalised, and a ban on 0 hours contracts. But saying that, you are still covered by the Equality Act. So I'm not an expert on this, but as I understand this kind of a legal technicality where the Equality Act, only if you're truly, truly self-employed are you not covered by it. But if you're employed through an agency, you still are covered by the Equality Act. So that duty to provide reasonable adjustments. I was going to flag as well that I know for long COVID, NASUWT, along with other education unions, have put together a protocol around long COVID, And I think that has some information in around supply teachers and agency staff as well. And it's for long COVID, but I think there's stuff in there that would apply across the board in terms of what good employers should be doing to support those members of staff. The second question around the migrant crisis, I think, is really, really important and something we should be talking about all the time. It's horrifying to see the way that people are treated in this country, and we have our government using far-right language to describe refugees and asylum seekers. The talk of an invasion is completely unacceptable, and I think it's not just an issue that affects refugees and asylum seekers. The racism that we see in those debates then feeds into racism that affects all workers and affects all children in schools. So we have to tackle it. I just wanted to shout out to two unions that I know are doing some specific work around this. So PCS are part of the coalition that are taking the government to court around the Rwanda decisions. And I know they're doing some work around safe routes as well. So we really need safe routes into this country. The POA as well have been very involved in exposing what's been happening at Manston and the horrifying conditions that we've seen there. I think also from the perspective of the Home Office, this is a staffing and a training issue. There is not enough investment in the staff at the Home Office to be making these decisions quickly. And staff in the Home Office are not trained to be able to make those decisions well enough. I think there was an article a couple of weeks ago, maybe last week, that exposed the lack of training that staff are receiving. So it's a workers issue as well, in terms of these workers are not being supported in their workplaces. Just to add on that, I volunteer in it's a Home Office accommodation centre where people get placed, and you are supposedly only meant to be placed there for a maximum of 6 months. And I volunteered there before the pandemic, have come back in the last month, and the same families are there. They are not being moved on in 6 months. Some people have been there for over 3 years at this point. And if you are in one of those accommodation centres, your kids supposedly don't get a school place because it's meant to be temporary. Obviously, kids are now being placed in schools because people are living there so long, but it means these children are missing huge chunks of their education. And it's just really saddening to see the kind of conditions that people are living in. But yeah, I think two really, really important questions, and I want to say don't ever apologise for asking them, because I think ask it at every conference.
Absolutely.